Hi, I'm Greg Yellen with Reynolds & Reynolds, and this is Connected. Today's a little bit different of an episode for us. I'm pretty excited about it, so hang with me and let me know what you think. But we're going to actually piece together a few conversations that we've had over the last few years. Our producer, Molly Swigert, actually went through and found some topics that are kind of evergreen, and they're coming back to the surface now, so I wanted to share them today. We also have our Reynolds Retail Summit coming up September 25th and 26th, and a lot of these topics are still top of mind and they're evolving. So some of these speakers or some of these people will be speaking at the conference as well. So wanted to share some of these today, and we'll dive right in. So the first one is a pretty well-known guest, Brian Pash. Brian was on the podcast not too terribly long ago, but one of the things that he was talking about, and he's been talking about for quite a while, is the idea of a customer data platform and what to do with it. I mean, first of all, what it is, but also how do you act on it? And Brian has some really good ideas on this. Brian will actually be speaking at our Reynolds Retail Summit. He'll be on the second day on Tuesday at 11 a.m. So if you're interested, should be a great conversation and an interactive session with him. But for now, take a listen to this conversation we had a few months back. No, that's good. And you mentioned, Modern Retailing Conference is the name of it, MRC. You mentioned connected retail. There's a lot of words out there. And I want you to define this for me a little bit, but I think it's similar to what we call internally and externally being able to retail anywhere. That's right. So I think it's a lot of the same philosophies, but in your words, when you say modern retailing or connected retailing, what do you mean? What's important about that?
Sure. So people have put digital retailing tools on their website, but for the most part, they have not use the same tools inside the showroom. So as nice as a digital retailing tool could be online, when the consumer walked in, typically they were shown an antiquated desking system or a different visual tool
or a piece of paper.
Yeah, or a piece of paper, right? And so the trust breaks down. So knowing that we are not at a point to transact completely online because the consumers don't want that, 9 out of 10 consumers still want to come in, touch, feel the car, and get advice. We at least should be making sure that whatever we present online, the look and feel, the numbers, the accuracy is the same tools we use in the showroom. And I think that connected experience builds trust, accelerates the transaction, and allows the time to be focused on the things that are really important, like finding the right vehicle for the consumer and not, jumping around the hoops with numbers. So I think a modern retailing process is consistent, it's transparent, and it values the consumer's time. And what we started with was tools to expose on the website was what was once only available in the showroom or in the F&I office. That was phase one, digital retailing. I'm going to bring out to the outside world the stuff that we kept secret, which was the payments, basically, right? I think connected retailing is now, okay, now that didn't blow up our business because some dealers thought that's the end of the world. We don't talk about payments outside the four walls of the dealership. Now let's make sure it's the same experience. And then the future, which would be, as you mentioned, retailing anywhere, is the idea of a single source of truth, a single sales process that can be executed on mobile, it can be executed on tablet, desktop, at work, to the degree that the dealer and the consumer are comfortable, where that including would be electronic signatures and eContracting, right? I mean, that would be the anywhere piece would mean, 9 out of 10 might like it today, but in the future, will more and more people feel comfortable of just signing and delivering?
Right. Okay.
When all of that happens, then it's not only a connected retail experience, but it can be done anywhere.
Yep, absolutely. And I would layer into that too. I mean, I think you're spot on, but I would layer in, we talk a lot about, and we all do, the consumer experience, right? And enabling that consumer interaction, but that's only half of the equation.
Right.
And the other half is the person that's in the store, or that, frankly, they could probably be anywhere too, but the dealership employee, and making that process easy and seamless for them. Did you ever work retail growing up, or is it?
I did, but not in automotive.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in a auto parts store, worked retail, and then I worked at Target too in college. So I had a decent amount, and then coming out of college, did retail. Actually started a parts company. Long story, but worked retail a pretty decent amount of time. And I can tell you, just in that experience, and I'm sure you've had the same experience, it can be really stressful as somebody that's trying to deliver a good customer experience, trying to deliver a good guest experience. But you got 2 people on hold on the phone. You got 3 people standing in front of you. And for me at that time, trying to look up parts in a catalog, like an actual physical catalog, and finding the right part. There's just a lot of stress on you too. So it's really difficult to provide a great experience. So I think as important as the customer experience is the dealership employee experience, and making that seamless for both sides of the equation.
Right. And I think even the movement in the industry to offer consumers a single point of contact, is along the lines with, hey, if the tools are really consistent, and what the consumer saw online is the same that the sales associate is presenting. If it's a guided tour, if it has some workflow logic, if it has some bumpers that the sales associate can't go off the rails on, isn't this a better experience for then both the consumer and the sales associate? And we're finding it is. Yeah. And so even though there's not one modern sales process, it is very different than the traditional sales process. And that's what we're going to highlight in November at the Modern Retailing Conference. What does a modern retailing process look like if you're a single point, or if you're a traditional, F&I manager? But what's different about it that is worthy of saying this is a modern refresh on something that has worked but no longer is relevant to consumers?
Man, Brian is so good, and I always appreciate his thoughts and insights for sure. Looking forward to seeing him again as always, and I think he's got a conference coming up in the fall as well, so we'll have more on that later. But one other small snippet from that same conversation, it was a little later on though. Check this one out.
So I think the future is going to look something like this. The outside of automotive, multi-million-dollar companies and billion-dollar companies, some of these groups are building customer data platforms or customer data engagement platforms where they're making sure they have a single source of truth for their customer data and all the interactions. For car dealers today, it's really hard because they have too many cooks in the kitchen. They have 5 or 6 or 7 vendors on their website, and then they have a separate email marketing company for service and a separate email marketing for sales. Then they have a separate text messaging company and a direct, So the future, I think, is going to be the automotive industry is going to look to tech providers who can create and maintain and securely store their customer data in a way that larger dealer groups might leverage for their own digital marketing platform execution, or others are going to look for companies who can do it for them. But I think the days of having 12 companies in and accessing customer data with disconnected marketing messages, we've had this problem for years.
Right.
But what's going to change? I think it's the new privacy laws. I think when dealers realize that they gave their DMS access to this 2 email companies and 2 direct mail companies, and this, and then they start getting lawsuits because when someone filled out the form, the dealer didn't disclose, well, these 10 companies are going to get a copy of your data. Well, then it's going to, money is going to move to what the bigger dealer groups already know. I got to own my data. I have to have a single source of truth, and I need to leverage that single source of truth to power personalized marketing. How we get there and how fast we get there, I don't know. Right. But the larger dealer groups are working on these projects. They're called CDP projects or CDXP for experience platforms, but that is the future. And, in my viewpoint, Reynolds & Reynolds is going to be a key player in that space only because of all the touch points that you can see and the data security that you already have in place, right? So I think we're going to move in the future to try to lock down our data a little bit more, not from using it, but from making sure we don't get lawsuits because we are sloppy with it.
Well, and if you want to, I'll say terrifying experiment, create a Gmail address, just some generic one that you don't give to anybody, fill out a form on your website and see how many emails you start getting and who they're from.
Right.
That is really enlightening. When after 3 weeks, you're getting emails from companies that you have no interaction with, and it wouldn't even necessarily make sense for you to be getting an email from. There's only one place that you entered that email address.
Right.
So try that and just see what happens. We have a platform available to our dealers. We call it Interface Dashboard, and they can log in and see exactly where anybody that's accessing data that they've approved to send data to. They can see what's going there and how often and who it's going to. So there's tools that are in place today for people to check these things out, but if you just want a quick, it's not fun. It's the word that keeps coming to my head, but a terrifying experiment. Create a fake email address, put it in, and see what happens.
Oh yeah, and I occasionally put my email address in LinkedIn, and just in an article contact me. Oh man, the scrapers go crazy. Okay, that's deliberate. You put out in the public, you get what you get. But I think that what dealers are going to need to realize, if we look at the future, and this is where more collaboration has to come in, we need, as an industry, to understand that outside of automotive, CDPs are how multi-million-dollar and billion-dollar corporations value their customers and increase the lifetime value. And somehow, some way, the auto industry has to wake up and saying, spray and pray, spray and overlap, double mail or send outdated messages to people isn't smart. And maybe it's because we had unlimited cars to sell and we were always selling cars and always profitable. But with the changes in the future, I think the local dealership ownership of the customers can become even more important. And anything they can do to protect that customer relationship and to enhance the customer relationship instead of maybe watering it down, I think it's important.
I always love talking to Brian. It's just a fun conversation to have. Looking forward to seeing him again, obviously, as always. Another topic that has been around for a while, it's been evolving for a while, but it seems like it is just getting more and more in the forefront of things going on, is the idea of cybersecurity. And the FTC safeguards amendments went into play here last June. They were obviously delayed for 6 months or so heading into that. But these type of cyber incidents and phishing incidents continue to pop up over and over again. So we're lucky enough to have talked with Brad Holton, who is the founder of Proton Technologies. Proton is a company that focuses on IT management, cybersecurity, among other things. But Brad is a real wealth of knowledge when it comes to these pieces of the industry and why it's so important and really a fundamental part of your business and frankly, table stakes. So take a listen to this conversation. It was definitely a fun one. So where are you seeing the biggest gaps between what dealers have today in place and what they need, whether it's for insurance requirements or for the FTC safeguards rule amendments? What are the areas that you see them honing in on, or maybe when you come in or your team comes in, where are the biggest gaps?
Well, the biggest gaps that we focus on and that we're, kind of immediately just alarmed about when we walk into a dealership that's a brand new opportunity is the low-hanging, low-level stuff that's not even being done. Okay. We'll walk in and see computers that are running Windows 7 that haven't had any kind of, security support in 3 years. Right. They don't have antivirus, or they have legacy antivirus that doesn't really work against anything modern. That's
the part that amazes me. So when you get into this antivirus software and just endpoint protection in general, so putting something on a PC or on a phone or whatever, how quickly that stuff changes and becomes obsolete. The updates are it's almost constant.
Yeah. So, there's, any of the brands that existed, I can't name brands, but just stuff that was common 5-7 years ago does absolutely nothing for any of the current stuff. And the reason why, at a very high level, is that the way antivirus typically works is it looks at a database, and it looks at a file you're downloading, and it looks at the signature of the file, and it says, I've seen this before because it's in my master database. That's a bad guy. I'm going to block it. That's typically what antivirus does, and not much more. Mm-hmm. The problem is that now the bad guys, for lack of a better word, the hackers, are generating files on demand. So when you go to click a download link, it actually generates the file, adds a little bit of content to it, maybe changes one digit somewhere in a file. So the signature is brand new, it's never been seen before. So when you download it, your antivirus, that's traditional legacy version, has never seen that file before. Mm-hmm. Every single file becomes a zero-day exploit. And as a result, it gets past antivirus all day long. So the modern stuff, called endpoint detection or managed detection response, it uses a totally different process called heuristic modeling that I don't want to get too deep. It basically injects itself into everything so it can see literally what's going on. And then we can see every single computer simultaneously. So you can see that one computer is attacking another computer on the network, or scanning the network, or doing things it shouldn't be doing. Mm-hmm. So it gives you a much more kind of broad, holistic approach to the environment, and able to kind of see things that are activities that shouldn't be happening, regardless of whether a file is brand new or not. So having tools like that in place, we're not seeing much of that. Walking in and just seeing, like we did a security audit. I flew across the country, it was going to be a cybersecurity audit, and I was done in 7 minutes. Oh. And I walked in, I sat down, I said, just take me to a computer that's not being used. And I sat down to a Windows 7 computer with no security at all, no password on it, I said, let's just try one more. Just take me to another computer that's not being used. And we take another one. It's Windows 10, but it's not much better. Yeah. And I said, okay, I'm done. I've been here 7 minutes, and you guys don't even have like the first 10 things I would audit. You don't have any of them. Yeah. So there's not much point in me spending a whole lot of time here writing a big report, because this is just pointless. So they signed up, and we started, kind of getting the basics done, and then building a platform on top of that to getting them 99% hardened up.
Yeah. So once you have that foundation, then what are the next pieces? So if you're honing in and you go into a store and it's like you got nothing, right? You get the nothing to something.
So
then what's next?
Our biggest concerns in the security world, like the big 3 events that are going to take a dealership into a really bad place. It's going to be a data breach, where we're going to lose customer data, and we're going to have to deal with the fact that we've lost customer data. We're going to have to go out and inform all the consumers. We're going to have to deal with legal issues. We're going to have to buy credit monitoring software. all that stuff. That's number one. Mm-hmm. So we want to protect against that. Second is ransomware and shutting down the entire dealership. Right.
That's the one that terrifies me when I hear about that. It's just
you have no idea how many times this happens. It's like the loudest secret you could possibly have in the dealership world, right? Everybody goes to 20 groups. Everybody knows this happens every single week, but nobody ever talks about it. But I promise you, our phone rings every week with some dealer group that's been referred to us, or some dealer that we already have that has a buddy that's under ransomware attack right now. It's just constant. So that's the big second one, and the third one is wire transfers. Just getting access to phishing and getting into systems and getting information and getting illicit funds. So those are the 3 things that we really focus on. FTC, if you do all of this, you're going to get pretty close on the FTC. And then you'll just have to tack on like vendor assessments and written information security plans and incident response plans. But if you get kind of all these other things knocked out, you've kind of hit most of the FTC stuff. Okay. So that's the thing. We come in, we focus on ransomware protection first. Let's get secure. Let's get the managed detection response. Let's get some SIM solution in where we're monitoring everything. We're getting alerts. Let's get backups in place, right? So if something does happen, we've got really good backups of everything. So it's not that big a deal. We can always restore from backup. Right. Let's get the data breach locked down to make sure that there's no way anybody's getting in to get access to our information. And then, on the wire side, it's protecting everything as best we could, but it's also doing a lot of business kind of process consulting and saying, okay, guys, if someone sends you an email that you've been buying cars from for 10 years, right? And they say, we're going to change our wire instructions. And here's the new wire account, for those, it's 10 cars you're buying from us right now. And your person doesn't stop and go, wait a minute. I've been wiring for 10 years to this account. Now I'm getting an email that says to wire here. How do I handle this, right? You stop, you call the dealership, you talk to the person you don't call the number on the email. Right. You don't go by the email. All right, you verify in 3 or 4 different ways. Because it's a big thing, right? We're changing where we're sending money.
Well, and it's a lot of money. Yeah. It's not. We're not talking about $20.
You would be amazed. You would be absolutely amazed how many times we get calls where or we get to be brought in as kind of consultants on a legal case, where someone has just gotten an email that changes the wire instructions. We had one group up in it's a single kind of high-end store that got 2 different emails the same day to change wire instructions, and they've been wiring funds out to these 2 different ones they were buying from for 10 years.
Yeah.
And they just changed the account and wired off $800,000 to a hacker. So, consulting business processes and financial controls, and then kind of hardening up the environment and preparing for the worst to make sure we don't have to deal with the worst.
I really enjoyed that conversation with Brad. Always has great ideas. Another founder that we got to have on the show and had a really good conversation with, actually a couple different times, but going back through, this was one from NADA a couple years ago. We got to sit down with Todd Marcelli, who was the founder of GoMoto, and talk about the customer experience and the customer relationship through the lens of the service department. Really enjoyed this conversation, so take a listen to this one too.
So when you think about that, what are the biggest changes you've seen in how a service advisor operates, what their job is, and how would you kind of define the characteristics that make a good service advisor today?
Yeah, so let's take that question in two parts, because I think it's really important. I think there's been an evolution in service technology. So 10 years ago, customers would just show up and very few would actually schedule an appointment. Right? Then scheduling software came in, and that kind of transitioned our business from a wild, wild west to a plan type of business where, we started to see 20%, then 30, then 40, then 50. Most dealerships now run at, 70, 80, some 100% capacity on appointments and have very little ability to service kind of the walk-in type of customer, right? So that's been a big evolution because it's forced us to change the way we do business. But more importantly, it's also given us more intelligence about the customer. Because when a customer walks in, you don't know what problem they have. Now, when they set an appointment, you actually have a process by which to understand and decipher kind of what the initial problem is or service. We have a BDC that actually calls and confirms and asks some key questions, and it prepares our advisors and the technology, frankly, that we want to select to be much more curated to the process that we want to have. And so then it goes into, okay, what does that mean for the service advisor? Well, 10 years ago, the service advisor was the main conduit by which, we had a relationship with the dealership. And that still hasn't changed. What has changed is ultimately the way that we want to treat our customers because, COVID, good or bad, right, has created a convenience experience for our customers that they expect everything, frankly, on demand, when they want it, how they want it, right? And so that's forced us as dealers and as a technology partner to think about what do we need to do to ensure that we offer an omni-channel experience to our customers, right? So I break customers into kind of three sets now, right? You have the old school customer, right, that still wants to come in and have that one-to-one relationship with the advisor.
Right.
You then have kind of the newer age consumer, right? That is, think EV customer, right? That all of it is technologically leading, right? So the older set of customers, about 20%, the kind of newer customer, the EV type of customer that's all about ultra convenience is, 20, 30%. And they want to literally not talk to anybody, phone or text message that the car's done, do everything electronically, and then pick the car up at their terms.
Right.
And then you have kind of the middle of the road that are now adopting that kind of mode where they've kind of transitioned into, I like convenience. I want to be able to come in. I don't want to wait for 30 minutes, right? I want trust. I want transparency, and I want convenience. And that's the majority of our customer base today. And so what's happened with the advisors is that kind of that opening end, because life has just gotten busier, has moved away from kind of that trust building that used to happen 10 years ago when you walked in and spent 20 minutes. It's now happening post MPI. So what customers want is a fast, convenient experience, but they still want the trusted relationship of the advisor to call them or text them or email them, for example, an electronic MPI, where once they've had the opportunity to actually look at the vehicle, inspect it, and share those results with me as a consumer, that's where the trust is because, I think there's an old school debate about, when that customer walks in, I do that, dedicated walk around and spend 10 minutes trying to upsell them. Customers are still skeptical, right, about that process. What they're not skeptical about because they've learned the buying habits from kind of e-commerce is that I'm willing to make the investment to come to you as a dealer.
Yeah.
Always love getting to talk with Todd. Great guy and really good ideas about the industry. Going back to that same NADA, it was the first NADA that we did interviews at the show. Also got to sit down with Maxine Olson from Volkswagen Credit. We had a really interesting conversation about e-contracting. And it's fascinating to see how fast things have progressed over the last year and a half or so since we had this conversation. We're really, across the industry going all in on e-contracting, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But listen in on this conversation and some of the things that Volkswagen was doing then and they're continuing to do. This will be a conversation that we definitely have a follow-up on sometime soon because so much is changing so fast. So take a listen.
All right, so Maxine, I get to talk to dealers a lot about the contracting process from their perspective. I don't get the opportunity a lot to talk to lenders about the contracting process from your perspective. So I want to get into that with this conversation. So to start, can we talk a little bit about what the traditional contracting process looks like? So from a dealer, right, they sign paper, they stuff it in a FedEx envelope, and they ship it off. And then at that point, it comes to your team, Volkswagen Credit. What happens once it gets there?
Well, from that perspective, from the paper perspective, it is sorting through the mail, pulling out all different kinds of paperwork, which can be several different pages, several different folders, and then manually entering all that data, looking at it, auditing it, and then finding out that there's something wrong with the contract, and now mailing it back to the dealer and saying, look, there's a problem. We have to have it fixed. The dealer takes time, gets the customer back into the office. Then it gets mailed back to us, which of course is weeks later.
Yeah.
And then it gets finally funded, and it's worked sometimes several different times before it's funded. So obviously it's not sustainable.
Right. And it's people heavy, right? You have somebody physically reviewing the paper. How many deals can a person do in a day? It seems like it's got to be very resource intensive.
When it's paper, yes, there's not that many deals that you can do in a day. And the problem is when you have to redo that same deal over and over, that's where it becomes difficult. So it's not even so much how many can you do in a day, but how many times do you have to do the same deal in a day?
Yeah, it's tough. So fast forward to today's world, and we're really pushing into eContracting, right? And
Yes.
not just digital signing, not getting something signed and then scanning it in and reviewing it in an electronic format, but rather
Correct.
eContracting. So maybe to start from Volkswagen Credits and your perspective, can you define eContracting? When you say eContracting, what do you mean?
Sure. That is a really good question because it does have different meanings in the industry. So e-contracting for us is going through what we call the vault. So the vault system. So electronically signing all your document, and with VCI, you can sign all of the paperwork through the electronic signatures, and then it goes into and sent over to us electronically into the vault, and the contract is secured. So that to us is where it's very important. We do understand that there are certain documents for the DMV that need to be printed out for the customer, but for us, none of that has to be. It can all be electronically signed and electronically sent over to us. And if you can think about that versus paper, you can already see where the efficiencies are.
Yeah. And for a dealer, obviously, a lot of it lies in contracts in transit, right? Being able to get a funded deal and just get cash in bank quicker. When you're doing a decent amount of deals, if you have any amount of volume and if you have multiple stores, that number gets really big, really fast.
Really big.
Yeah. So being able to speed that up and reduce that amount of money that's just kind of sitting out there because it hasn't been funded yet is a big deal, and it can really help with cash flow. What about for you guys, from the lender's perspective? What are the benefits of moving to e-contracting? Where do you see the benefits?
Wow, there are so many benefits on our end as well. If you think about what I talked about for the paper process versus electronic process, so now it comes into us and it is all on a screen and it is all actually input already. So we don't have that mail process of sorting. We do not have the scanning of the documents. We do not have the manual entry. So it actually takes us about a third of the time to process one document or one funding package as it would for paper. It's already in there, and most of the time the fund it right the first time is a lot higher, up to 23% higher. So now we've cut 23% of our reworks out. So the other part that's extremely important, especially since the pandemic, is our funders can fund from anywhere. They do not have to physically be in the office because it comes directly to their computer and they can fund from home. So it is extremely important to us to keep our productivity as we go forward and move forward to be very process driven. We have to have a high productivity and not have to hire other people, especially when you have the seasons where sometimes it can be very manual intensive during your hot selling season. And that's when CIT gets bad, is we can't fund those deals. So it does make a huge difference for us.
Yeah. So are you able to then, maybe take some of those resources in people, right, and expand them and either do more deals or help them do other things to make an impact for your company or for the dealers? You had mentioned your organization is a very wide-ranging organization and field training and all kinds of things that you're doing in the dealer community too. What has that meant to be able to be more productive when it comes to funding the actual deal and employing those resources to accomplish other things?
Sure, which is a really good question, because we're not looking to make our funding staff smaller.
Right.
What we're doing is we're trying to be more efficient so we can help the dealers in those areas where they need help. So the problem deals where they really do need our assistance and we can help them, we are available for them now versus, hey, you know what, we have 100 deals that we have to get through and we don't have time for our dealers. So it's really about servicing our dealers and making sure that when we process their paperwork, it's efficient, it's done right, and we can help.
I still love that conversation with Maxine. She's great and has great ideas, and enjoyed her sitting down and talking with us. Another one, and probably our last one for today that I want to share is a newer conversation that we had, but one that I'm really excited about. So I got to sit down with AJ McGowan. AJ is the founder of Autovision, a company that we actually acquired not too long ago. And I'm excited about what they're doing in the used vehicle space and vehicle acquisition and merchandising. A lot of really interesting things. It's one of those areas that it seems like we've accepted the status quo for so long because, quote unquote, it's not broke, right? That it's really time to take a new look, a fresh look. And what AJ and his team have built and what they're doing at Autovision is pretty interesting. So take a listen to this conversation. You can also see AJ at the Reynolds Retail Summit here in September. He'll be there kind of engaging in conversations, but also just showing off what he's built. So make sure to see him if you're there. And dealers have been doing this for a long time, right? On a lot of different levels, been buying cars and selling cars and making pretty decent money, especially over the last handful of years. And honestly, margins are staying pretty decent right now. So what, when you think about the problem, right? And you mentioned like solving problems. What is the problem with pricing right now? I mean, what are you able to fix, or what did you set out to fix, I guess, with Autovision and what you're doing?
Well, so you really hit the nail on the head when you said that, dealers know what they're doing and know how to price cars. And, we looked at, when we looked at the industry, what we saw was that there were a lot of folks that were bringing data to bear in automotive, but they were very opinionated. So, if you look at the way that cars are traditionally priced, you can get down to specifics in terms of, what zip code is it in and, what options does it have on it, some of those sorts of things. But the thing that's never really taken into account is, that dealer's, specific view of the market. A buy here, pay here lot looks very differently at a car than a franchise dealership, who looks at it very differently than, a big block retailer on the used side. And a large franchise group looks at it much differently than, a 2 or 3 rooftop group. And, that perspective of really understanding your local market is something that is, wildly invaluable and sort of the secret sauce in a lot of ways to, many dealerships' operations. And so, our goal with Autovision was to use, technology that's available now to do real-time processing, which allows dealers to really set their view of the market into Autovision. And then we use our tools to analyze the data that's there and show them this is what this vehicle is worth to you. So we try very hard not to have an opinion about what a vehicle is worth. What we try to do is leverage, these big tech tools to do a lot of analysis of data in real time, but then really just to automate and help to streamline and turn into a process the things that dealers already know.
Yeah, so go a little deeper for me then. What I guess maybe give me an example, right, of how would a vehicle be priced differently, either when being purchased or being sold, for, pick your example, but, a buy here, pay here lot versus, 20 store franchise dealer group? Like what are those differences when you say their view of the world or their view of that vehicle? What variables come into play?
Sure. Yeah. So let's kind of step it down from, so if you're talking about like a big dealer group that has geographic reach, when they're looking to buy a vehicle, they may not, and all dealer groups operate a little bit differently, but they may not necessarily need to retail out of that vehicle at the store in which it was picked up, right? Sure. They've got a store in Colorado, they've got a store in Los Angeles. Four-wheel drive Jeep that they pick up in Los Angeles is probably going to sell a lot better in Colorado. Or it might not if that particular model is, sort of flooded in the marketplace there. And so being able to analyze, in real time, what are the geographic conditions and, where might I be able to best retail out of this based on the local market conditions and how much it's going to cost to actually move the vehicle. Being able to look at all of those factors are really important. If you have the geographic reach, take advantage of it. What
are some other examples? I mean, that's a good example, right? That's a good realistic variable. So what, as you're going down that path, where else were you heading?
Sure. So if you look at, and this is true of really any franchise, let's say that you're a Toyota dealership and, you get a 2020 Prius that comes in as a trade. Well, you may look at that very differently than the Ford dealer across the street. You might only want to see, when you're looking at what market pricing is, you might only want to see other CPO cars from other Toyota dealerships. Or you might only want to see other franchise dealerships and you don't care as much about, what some of the independents are doing. So your view of that vehicle being a Toyota dealership is very different than other people's will be. And our tech, again, allows you to, look at that and sort of slice and dice it and say, for my dealership, when I'm looking at Toyotas that are within a couple of years old with these parameters, I want to look at those differently. I want to look at a different set of competitors. And maybe for other vehicles, being a franchise store, I don't care about what some of the online retailers are doing or some of the, sort of nationwide franchises. And we can even allow you to exclude or specifically include specific competitors automatically, again, as we're calculating prices for vehicles. And everything that we talk about, we don't ever make a distinction between appraise time and price time. So you can set up different parameters if you want within the system, but all the capabilities are the same. So you can look at that vehicle, whether you're appraising it or you're following that, down the chain and pricing it later and say, how is the market actually shifting around me? And so one of the other things that we do that's very different is we add a lot of automation because we can get to the point where we're really encapsulating that dealer's view of the universe. That allows us to then automate processes like when we go to price cars, we can update that retail market on a daily basis because we know all of the parameters that go into making that market. And then sort of stepping down from there from a franchise dealership or really sort of any franchise dealership, you start to talk about independent dealerships. There's a huge variety of independent dealerships, and they all have different needs. A large Indy that's carrying 200 or 300 cars, very different than, somebody that's got 50 cars, very different than one that has 10. Buy here, pay here, different than non-buy here, pay here. And again, when you look at all of that customization that goes into it, they might have the opposite view where they don't care what the franchises are retailing it for. Or, for on-brand late model Toyota, they don't want to see what the CPO cars are retailing for because that's not really their market. That's not who they're appealing to. And so just, kind of using those, kind of three examples, I think hopefully that gives you a little bit of context. Those are three, kind of high level examples of how you can use AutoVision to define, hey, here's how I look at the universe, or here's how I look at the universe for these specific cars. And then that's now baked into your appraising, your pricing, and you can control that consistently throughout your store.
Really enjoyed that conversation with AJ. I hope you like that clip too. It's just fascinating what he and his team have built and what they're doing in that used vehicle space. So a quick reminder, Reynolds Retail Summit is coming up here September 25th and 26th. If you haven't registered, make sure to do so now. You can do that at rayray.com/amplify. And I hope you enjoyed this format that we tried. Again, special thanks to Molly Swigert for finding these topics that are really evergreen and are standing the test of the time and actually getting more interesting with time. Looking forward to maybe doing this some more in the future. Definitely let us know what you think. Before you hop off, don't forget, you can watch or listen to all episodes of Connected on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify podcasts. And make sure to subscribe so you're notified every other week when new episodes are released. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.